Alright. Welcome to the semi-final rounds of JUDC 2014. Today we have the motion this House would require all prospective parents to obtain a license before having children. Without further delay, may we have team from HKUST members, Prime Minister from HKUST 4 to start the debate. Thank you.
Here.
Can I have time? Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So first I would like to begin by clarifying a few terms which are involved in the motion, and then I would move on to present why the government wishes to have a licensing policy which allows prospective parents to have children. Now, firstly beginning with the first definition, that is prospective parents. By prospective parents, we mean that they are a married couple firstly, and secondly that they tend to have children in the future. And another word is license. Licensing. By licensing, we mean that a document that gives the parents to have children, and the license has to be taken before pregnancy has occurred. So, with these definitions in mind, we want to set this model in a country which is focusing on population control, and there are a lot of social expenditures in terms of subsidies towards children and other various social causes. Now, why do we? So, through this debate, the opening government will prove that why is it necessary to have licensing in place and why is it imperative. So beginning with the status quo. Under the status quo, we're facing a surge in population and which is unsustainable. The growth in the population cannot be sustained in the long run. Therefore, they're creating an undue pressure on the resources and on the limited resources that we have. And therefore, we believe that in the future, this would lead to a reduction in the lifestyle of people. Moreover, there are various societal societal problems that the country is facing due to this increase in population, such as pressure on natural resources. Moreover, there has been an increase in crime rate that has been seen. Now, through my debate on various points, I will further substantiate why this is happening and why do we need and how licensing can solve this problem. The first reason why we want to bring in licensing is that we wish to have population control. Now, why is population control important? Firstly, as of under the status quo, there's a lot of pressure on the resources. It is the population growth trend that currently the country has is not sustainable in the sense that the resources that we have, for example, oil and oil for agriculture, and in terms of various other resources, we do not have enough resources to sustain the population. And on the second aspect, the government provides a lot of subsidies to the people having children. Moreover, we have a lot of subsidies and grants associated so that there's efficient development of the children, and that these children are converted into efficient human resource. Therefore, the social cost associated with these subsidies are very high, and therefore since we need to control these costs, it is necessary to bring in licensing. Why licensing would solve this problem is that now we can be selective, and that we can give only and then we can control the number of licenses that are available, and based on this, and moreover, we'll have an institution in place. We will evaluate whom to be provided license. So this way, we can control the amount of addition in population that is taking place every year.
Can you please clarify what are the paradigms you're going to set for giving out license, whom to give out the license?
Yes, we intend to set out paradigms. However, that is not under the focus of this debate. As of now, we plan to bring in licensing and the various things that are associated. How the implementation is not the focus of this debate. Whether or not we need a license, that is the focus of this debate. Therefore, your point is not exactly relevant. The second reason why we wish to bring in licensing is that. There's a lot of times parents think that they can raise children. However, in actuality, they might not have the necessary resources because see, let's take a pragmatic approach towards things. When a parent is having a child, there's a kind of they become emotionally blinded and they lose the pragmatic approach of things. Therefore, in effect, they do not have the necessary resources, or they lack the they lack enough development. They lack enough financial or mental development to raise the children properly. Now, why is that bad? The reason is the reasoning is twofold. Firstly, that you have to think from the perspective of the child. Now, when the child comes in the world, although the parents they might think that they're fit, but they're not actually capable of raising a child. Therefore, this child leads a very sad life. His development might be hindered due to these particular reasons. Therefore, it is not fair for the child to be raised under such disadvantaged circumstances, while other children would have much more advantages than he probably would have. And from the society's perspective, we've seen that mostly parents are not quite a lot of times parents are not able to evaluate. Since they're not able to evaluate, they're not able to raise children properly, and that leads them to adopt certain ways. For example, they might indulge in crimes and they might cause societal problems because their basic needs have not been satisfied by children. Research has shown that the reason for crime is basically lies in the childhood. As in childhood rearing is one of the major issues why criminal activity is there. Therefore, we believe that by licensing, since we would be very selective and since we would be able to we would be able to see who can have children and who cannot. Therefore, we would be able to determine that they can efficiently raise the child and he would be fit to survive in the society that we have. Therefore, by doing this, we will be solving the problem of crime. We will be solving the problem of resources that we are facing. The shortage of resources that we're facing. At the same time, we'll be able to still we'll be able to cut down the government expenditure, which can be put to further enhance the future of the children who are currently there. Therefore, because of the reasons such as population control, because we want to control population and Earth has only so many resources, and currently we're seeing that the resources are being stretched, and there's a need for sustainable human development. We believe that our policy is in line with the need of today, that the emerging need that the humans need to undertake social sustainable development, and sustainable development can only be achieved by limiting population. By limiting population growth, because if the population growth is limited, then they would the resources that they would consume would also be curtailed. Therefore, because of reasons such as population control and the inability of parents to assess whether or not they can raise children, and the societal children and the societal consequences and the consequences that the child will have to face due to these things, we are very proud to propose licensing.
Thank you, Prime Minister. May we now invite the leader of the opposition to continue the case. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This House is opposed to the idea of requiring prospective parents to obtain a license before having children for two main reasons. First of all, the right to human life, and secondly, the feasibility of such a motion to require parents to obtain a license. So going to my first point, the right to family life. Under the UN Declaration, and can I remind you that the UN Declaration is signed and ratified by most countries and autonomous regions, and it is something that is universal, something that it's a universal declaration that people have signed, people have agreed to. And under that, they say that all parents have the right to human life. all humans have the right to family life. And but then you may ask, and international contract to go against something that you've already signed up to. But you might ask, how would it actually undermine their rights? How would by passing this motion undermine their rights to family life? Well, then, first of all, that goes to the purpose of licensing. The purpose of licensing is a screening process, right? Some people will be able to get the license. Some people will not be able to get the license. That is the purpose of licensing. You won't give everybody the license. So if you actually deny some people the right to get that license or the right to birth, then you are denying a substantial part of the family, the right to their family life, i.e., to have children. And also under the opening government's case, it is actually another infringement on human rights, is that they have discriminating against the poor. They say that because if you're poor, you may not be able to have the inner... Yes, please.
Madam, we've never said that poor people cannot actually.
Yeah.
And so, why do you think that this assumption is justified?
You have not explicitly said that poor people cannot have children, but what you have said effectively is that they may not have the ability to raise up their children because they do not have the financial resources to support the raising of a child. And then therefore, that is actually effectively discriminating against the poor's right to a family life, the poor's right to having children, which is something that we frown upon because we think that poor children being brought up in poor family has an equal chance of being well brought up, and you cannot just label them as being poor and therefore will not be able to live a good life, will not be able to have the financial resources that is needed for their well-being. Things do not always work like that. Sorry. Things do not always work like that. People have a chance, and just because they do not have enough money does not necessarily mean that they would be that they would not have a chance of living a good life. And if you say that children simply because they're poor, therefore they will not have a chance to as good a life, then effectively you're undermining, you're discriminating them even before they are born. Yes, please.
Right now, because there are dire situations within these poor families, there are a lot of cases of domestic abuse, domestic violence, and a lot of very care and attention given to these children. Would you consider that as a nice outcome under your UN model?
I agree that children should not be abused, but actually under your model, children will face even more abuse under your model. Why? Because it is actually, as I will go on to explain, it is actually not feasible to impose such a license. And when you impose such a license, what will happen? Right. I'll go on as I'll go on to explain. I'll be answering your POI. Yes. The opening government said they by setting up this license requirement, they mean that the parents will actually need to obtain the license before pregnancy. However, you must remember that pregnancy is sometimes happens according to a plan. Sometimes it happens accidentally, and therefore, and therefore and if it's happening accidentally, how can you? Does that mean they have to have an abortion immediately, or what does that mean? Do you have to give them a license, make it a must? And so if the latter, then you undermine the licensing effect. If the former, then you're actually undermining the right to life. And the other reason why I said it's not feasible is because if you look at one of the very big examples in the world, that is the one-child policy in China. What that has resulted in is a lot of so-called black market children who are denied the right to citizenship, and there are people who are dumping children on the streets. Black market children do not have the right to citizenship. They do not have equal rights to other children, and therefore they are actually being abused even more. And I'm answering a POI saying that they are actually being abused by the institution, by the country, and not just by their parents themselves. And because the parents are seeing them as perhaps an even greater burden because they cannot enjoy the social welfare of the the country that are providing to other children, that makes their life even harder. So you're actually making the abuse even graver under your model. And this is not something that we want to see. The other reason why it is not feasible is because the licensing process is a one-off process. You're saying that you base your you give out the license, but in this one-off process, you may take into account various things. It may be the level of education, it may be your the parents' intelligence, it may be your parents' wealth. But however, these things, or maybe the parents' tendency to violence, but all these things changes. Human behavior is not exactly predictable. 50 years later, or let's say 10 years later, you may be another person from you are now. But then once you've given them that license, they are legally allowed to give birth to children. But then when your children are 10 years old, maybe you become something very different. And so this is actually not a very fair process of licensing. The other reason why is because licensing is an object. You're trying to objectify something that is subjective. For example, your level of education. Just because you've achieved, say, a university degree, doesn't necessarily mean that you're more educated than someone who's taken a lot of courses outside of the normal institution. For these reasons, this house is very proud to oppose.
Thank you, Leader of the Opposition. May we now invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case. Thank you. Shh. Audience.
Anytime. Madam Speaker, I'd like to clarify before we move on that the opening government's case rests on the robust shoulders of two main factors that we are considering. Number one, population control, and number two, economic stability in a family. What we're looking at is a clear-cut trade-off between these two factors. And these are, and in response to one of the POIs that was asked to the Prime Minister, the paradigms that we're seeking right now is A, economic stability, and B, the number of children that are already there in a particular family. I'll be elaborating on this in a bit. The substantives I would like to provide are, number one, how population control is actually being controlled by this licensing process. And number two, how the government has its own reason for implementing this policy, which is unique to what the Prime Minister has said, because the Prime Minister has already mentioned how it helps the government save a lot of capital. But now I'll be talking about a more systematic and non-trivial way in which government is being helped. Now, before I move on to all that, let me go with a couple of rebuttals. Number one, we are not saying we will kill the children if they don't have a license associated with them. What we're saying is that we're not even infringing human rights. We're not curtailing family life. In fact, our policy is helping in enforcing the one-child policies that we are actually talking about. As must have been heard from the PM's speech, we're setting this motion in a place where population control is a concern. And it is imperative that a country like this will have its own way of controlling the population. So if you call our licensing process an infringement of human rights, well, condemn the government for already doing so in the past. Now, what I would like to bring about is that the OG's model is also not discriminating against the poor. It's not that the poor children are not unwanted. We're not curtailing these minorities from having children. What we're doing is we're striking a clear balance between the economic stability of a family and how many children or how many members of the family are already there. So for example, if there is a particular family which is, say, of 10 people and there's only one working member in the family, we would not like that family to have more children. Clearly, because the family is not very stable economically because there's just one member on which the entire family is depending. However, in a case where the one-child policy is already enforced, say there's a family of 3 and they already have one child, we could agree. These are the paradigms, these are the ways, these are the criteria we have set for the license. Now, on to my substantives. Number one, yeah, sure.
Can you please explain to us why some of the most derailed children are found in the richest of families?
Could you please repeat that?
Can you please explain to us why some of the most derailed children or drug addicts come from the most richest of families?
our policy does not take into account the character of what might happen to a child in the future. Our policy takes into account how capable a family is of having prospective children, as has already been mentioned in the motion. Now, on to my substantives. Number one, how population control is being controlled by this licensing process. Now, let's get to the root, or one of the main aspects in population control, and that is unplanned pregnancies. Our license is actually, we have forced this license to be put on before pregnancy for a particular reason. And the reason is simple. If we legalize the birth of children, if we legalize how many kids, or if a particular couple or a case-dependent person can have kids, then the people will be more aware about what they should do. They would try and come together, and they would actually use, say, condoms, for instance. They would use more measures to control their own. Well, you get what I mean. The thing is, unplanned pregnancies will be reduced because there's a legal force acting on them, preventing them from having more children. That's one of our substantives.
Yes, sir.
No thanks. Now, this is going to help the society as a whole and also the parents. Number one, why is it going to help the parents? We're already talking about how economic stability is important to the family, and by not having children, by having experts analyze their situation and provide a license, we're helping family planning. That's one. How is it going to improve society as a whole? It's going to globally control our population, as is very obvious. So that's our first substantive. Substantive number two is what the government has. Now, in today's date, a developing country, which, well, again, has already been said in the motion, always faces a trouble with demographics, with keeping records of people. There are multiple passport infringements, there are copies, there are crimes that are being done based on identity. Now, what this helps, what the perspective of what licensing in our case will help, is it will give the government a proper, improved and more systematic database of how many children, or which parents will have how many children, or will they even have children, and what are the conditions in which the particular parents are having children. This will help in calculating a lot of statistics that may determine growth rates, economic stability of a country, and other rates that are really important in the global stock market. So, all this will also help in various other ways. Number one, providing those subsidies that have already been talked about by the Prime Minister. Having such a database will help promote education on a very large scale, because every child can get education. Every child that has gone through licensing can get this education. Also, it will promote healthcare for these very children. So having such a database and having this licensing process in general will really help society, because of these, because they are, number one, saving government expenditures, and number two, they are actually helping society control population and develop systematic and informative standards of collecting information about a particular country. And that is precisely why I am very, very, very proud to propose.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. May we now invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the case. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, today the opening government has been talking about the reasons of economic stability and population control, and they've been all along explaining the reasons why these are important. As the opening opposition, we understand these problems' importance and the importance of solving them. But however, the problem that we are pointing out is that this policy, this motion itself, is not morally justified, and this policy on the practical level is not effective anyways. So I'll be backing up our statement by few points. First is the how this motion is not feasible. The second point is the psychology of couples. Third big point is about the government role, how it's not justified, not effective, and not necessary. I'll first like to move on to some rebuttals. So the first point that the opening government has been talking about is about population control. First thing we would like to
address is that this one, at this point, morally it is against the right to family life, as my partner has talked about. The opening government wants to control population by being selective, and this brings in the eugenics debate. Who is the government to make this judgment?
Point of information,
Sorry,
please.
the government is not justified to make this judgment. Second thing about population control, we would like to say that it's not effective at all. Seeing the one-child policy in China right now, the license system is letting people get the license before pregnancy. However, still some people may end up giving birth to children, and I'll talk about it in my first point of how it's not feasible to counteract that point. Second point that I talked about is the right of children. So we think that if we are talking about the right of children, if we have the motion, we are taking away the right of the children to even be born. However, if we do not have the motion, we still have the law to protect them, and we also have social resources, for example, education, to protect them. Yes.
The right of an unborn child to be born versus the complete economic breakdown of a family. How do you suggest this trade-off?
Okay, to answer this point, you've also raised the point of how to solve by having this motion, we're solving the problem of crime and resource shortage. This is what you're pointing out. So we would like to answer this by saying that it's not solving the problem by the correct method. The government should be allocating resources better than social services and enforcing better policing to decrease the crime rate, and not by pushing the responsibility to citizens by not letting them give birth. This is the answer to your POI. And the fourth point that they've pointed out is that they would not take into account the character of children in answer to our lower house POI. However, we think that this idea itself is self-contradicting. You said that you are handing out the license because you doubt that some parents may not have the best financial situation that could cater the children. And then if they're poor, your logic is that they may not be having enough resources to provide care for the children, and end up the children will become drug addicts, and so your motion would decrease the crime rate. This is your logic. Yet now you say that you're not taking into account the character of children. So this idea, we find it a little bit self-contradicting. So moving on to my substantive. First point about being not feasible. I would like to extend my partner's explanation on this point. We think that the problem with this motion is that we're not taking into account the couples who are giving birth to children when they're not planned pregnancy. So if they're not planned pregnancy, do we still get the citizenship to them? Their model is not clear enough to answer our question. So what does this brings about? This brings about many problems. It is similar to the one-child policy in China. People still give birth under this kind of enforcement of legal suppression. However, people still give birth to children, and the two solutions that they give, they do to the children being given birth is to dump them or put them into the black market, where it leads to children trafficking or slavery, which is even worse than having an economic breakdown of the family itself. If we're in the other case, if we're not letting if we let the not planned people or pregnancy obtain license afterwards, after their pregnancy, then it would be not fair to those who have to obtain it. So, second point about the psychology of couples. The psychology of couples. If they are, let us consider the case. If they're unable to conceive, however they've gotten the license, first thing is that they would double the regretful feeling, and then second thing is that it would be a big humiliation to some of the couples. Let us think about the case, because getting license is formalizing a kind of decision to pregnancy. It is taking the matter from between the couple to outside only between them. So it's adding to the humiliation of not being able to conceive to the couple. Third point about government role. First point under this is how it's not being justified morally. So first thing is that if as the opening opposition, we do not think that we should be bringing private matters into the public sphere. We should consider different cultures and different cultural beliefs under a society. For example, as Chinese people, they may be more conservative, and they would not want others to know about their decisions or decisions to pregnancy or conceiving a child. So it is infringing their rights to this kind of privacy. And the second thing is that we do not think it's justified in the government's stance because it's objectifying the parents' ability. And who is the government to do this kind of judgment? So are you going to objectify the care or the financial status of these kind of families? And should the care or the financial status be weighed more? So actually there are many cases where poor children can also be very well brought up. In this case, if this motion stands, then it would distort the value of how we weigh parenting and how we see parenting. Second point on the government role is how it's not effective. The psychology and behavior of parents change over time. If we're giving this license motion, if it stands, the license assessment is only one-off. So when we assess them, they may still be psychological, very stable. However, after 10 years, when the children have grown up, the psychological status of the parents or the economic status may already have changed. Third point on the government role is how it's not necessary. Because the neglect of children and abuse is already heavily penalized enough, and we think that it's enough deterrent effect already in the society, and we do not need this unnecessary motion to be enforced. And for the above reasons, we think that this motion must fall. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. May we now invite the member of the government to open the lower half debate. Thank you.
Madam Speaker. So today, after hearing all the uphouse debate, we found that there is a deadlock existing within the uphouse debate, right? With one side saying that, it is more important that we have to look at the financial conditions of the family so that we can actually provide all the adequate facilities and all the adequate materials to the children so that they can actually be raised in a very good environment. And with this side coming up and saying that, oh no, we should actually care more and pay more attention to the human rights issues of the children. Everyone should have a right to born, right to life and to have a family life. But what we have to do is to compare both paradigms, right? Because what we as the closing government would like to do is to uniquely bring you the try to solve this deadlock and to try to show you how we are actually taking the debate. Because what we have to do is to do a comparison between the two. Because of course we know that everyone should have should be entitled that kind of right. Should be allowed to actually have a family life, to have the right to human life. But what we have to do is that because children cannot make consent, right? Children cannot make consent to families saying that they can actually be born or not, because it is not a rational choice. They can never give that consent to parents. They are only born by the parents. That is why we have to say that it is more important that we have to use this motion to prevent a very serious situation from happening. But before I move on to my own substantive case, I would like to do a few comments rebuttals. So the opening opposition had talked about how this policy would be not feasible, and they cited the example of one-child policy in China. But what we see here is that no policy will be perfect, right? All laws, all legislation in societies will have some lawbreakers, right? It is bound to have some lawbreakers, some violation of laws. But this feasibility issue should not concern today's debate, because what we should do in today's debate is a principle debate to compare different principles and compare the benefits and harms. It's not about the feasibility issue that matter. And what we can do to remedy the situation is that we can actually, to prevent people from breaking the law, we can actually amend other laws to actually close the loophole, right? But this is out of the scope of today's debate, and we see that this point should not concern today's debate. Now, the second point brought by the opening opposition is about how it's not effective because it is just a one-off signing of that contract, of that license, right? But we say that parents are adults, right? They are actually used to making these kind of long-term, consistent decision-making process, right? Because they always have to make a lot of choices in life. They have to choose what jobs to go, to choose different apartments to live in. They always make these kind of long-term and rational and consistent choices. So we say that it is not that case that they are proposing. that there will be a very psychological inconsistency. And we also say that it is not going to happen because once the child is actually being born, there will be a kind of emotional bond and emotional seal between the parent and child. So it is not likely that the parent will actually change their mind overnight simply because they suddenly want to dump their children and do not want them anymore. Now, moving on to my own substantive. What we as the closing government would like to tell you uniquely in today's debate is about how what we have in the opening government's case is that we still propose to this model because we want to curtail, we want to limit government spending. We would like to help build better financial conditions within these families, right? But we would like to look at micro size of the micro scope of the families themselves, and we would like to tell you explicitly how it would actually benefit the children themselves, how it would benefit the parents themselves, lead to better family planning, and how we think that it is only fair and equal that we have this policy in place. Now, first point, about how it can protect the rights of children. Because first of all, we have to say that if we do not impose this motion, if there's no license to actually screen out parents and to take a look at the parents' financial conditions, right? We say that it is very detrimental because with financial conditions, it can actually lead to a number of consequences, a number of implications, right? If you do not have money, even though if you are very willing and very conscious of raising a child, it is not going to happen because in the end, because of the constraints of reality, there will be problems like black market and child trafficking. You have to sell your children to make a living, to sustain your own living, right? So it is very important that we have this motion in place. But more importantly, we say that when these kind of families are suffering in a very dire financial situations, there is a very large likelihood of having these kind of domestic abuse, domestic violence, because they say that the children is actually the root causes of their poverty, right? Of their financial conditions, right? That is why they will actually blame their children. They will actually want to have that kind of domestic abuse, right? That is why we want to have this motion in place. And we also say that with this motion in place, it is only right for the government to step in. And this leads me perfectly to my second point about the role of government. We say the only government tells you that role of government is to limit government spending. We would like to offer you a different perspective. We say that role of government is to actually protect the children, right? Because the children cannot protect themselves. Children are the vulnerable parties in this arrangement, right? Children are most vulnerable to the abuse by the government and by the family, parents themselves. That is why the government has to help the weak. The government has to step in. It is only the role of government to intervene. And we also say that not only that it can increase the protection, it can also increase the deterrent effect. Because when you actually sign that kind of contract, you have the contractual obligation to actually live up to it. And we also say that it is also better to have today's motion because simply when the government actually forces you to actually think about whether or not to actually try to have children, it will be an enforcement of that kind of rational decision, right? The government is actually actively forcing you to think through the process, whether or not you are willing to take up the responsibility of becoming a parent, and whether or not you should actually have that children. And the opposite side has also brought up an argument that everyone should be entitled to family life, so the parents should also have a right to have children. But we say that being a parent is not a right; it is a privilege. You should always think it through before you actually take up a responsibility. So it is never a human right, basic human right to become a parent. Now, we as a floating government has also talked about how it is only fair to have today's motion. Because right now, there is actually an active discrimination against those parents who choose to adopt, right? Because right now, within the adoption process, these kind of adopting parents have to go through a lengthy process, bureaucratic process of that kind of screening, of that kind of licensing, right? They have to go through that kind of scrutiny by the government. But why is government singling out these kind of adoption parents, right? Because all parents, we say that all children should be entitled to the same treatment, same protection by the government, and all the parents should also undergo that kind of process. Without that, it will be an active labeling effect of these kind of adopting parents, and the government using the institutional oppression, trying to send a very basic signal to society that the adoption parents are worse off. And the floating government is also talking about how to enforce a better family planning, because with that kind of rational decision, rational thinking being forced by the government, then the parents are more likely to become a better parent, right? Because they have now followed through, they will now want to carry out the decision. And it will also lead to more harmonious family relationships. Because when these kind of parents are more likely to give out better treatment to the children will reciprocate. That is why it will become a more harmonious family relationship. And it is the most important point in our debate, because family is a very important unit of society. And because we would like to keep better families, we are very proud to have the vote.
Thank you, member of the government. May we now invite the member of the opposition to continue their case. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, closing opposition brings you three major substantive today's debate. First of all, why economic stability in a macro level cannot be reached, which is the proponent of opening government. Secondly, we're going to prove to you that in the micro level, why this policy systematically excludes some people, which is only on financial basis, but not on the arts of parenthood, which we believe is what children need the most. Thirdly, we're going to prove to you why this policy actually threatens marriages of lots of parents. First of all, on the idea of population control, we believe that using birth control as a means in order to actually help the economy is not effective. Look at China today. They have constantly been trying to revive the one-child policy, essentially because they believe that using such a permit system in order to stop population growth is not effective at all. Because look at the paradigm that's been set up by opening government. They believe that it should be in cases where there are lots of populations, which means that those economies are underdeveloped, which means that those economies are generally labor-intensive in style, which means that the country essentially needs a lot of population in order to sustain the economic growth, in order to transfer the economy from labor-intensive to that of a long-term tertiary growth. What we are doing here today, we are not following the Indian model. The Indian model talks about having population growth, which means that why India's economy is catching up with China, essentially because India has been making use of its systematic ability in order to have lots of population, labor-intensive growth, in order to help the economy to grow. We believe that this is a much better method in order for the economy to grow rather than under their paradigm. Secondly, we believe that such a policy in fundamental ideas actually against that of human rights as being echoed by that of the opening opposition. We bring to you one more problem, which is the idea existing in one-child policy under in China, which is the systematic exploitation of girls under the paradigm. When the parents can only adopt can only have one child, under such countries that they set, they want boys. Because boys are essentially people that can provide them with labor forces, especially in poorer countries where farming is important. We believe that essentially what it means is that they're going to abort the child, or if they're only granted with one child, what they're going to do essentially is simply going to have abort the girl and prefer the boy. We believe that this is something bad because every life is significant. We should not sacrifice that of the economic situation of the family in order to go for such policy as only to boost that of the economic growth. Furthermore, we believe that it also creates the idea of eugenics, which should not be the role of the government in doing so. What they're saying is that they're assessing people in terms of financial capability, which means that rich people can have more children can only have one children or even less. We believe that this is essentially creating a division among that of the rich and the poor, which the government should not be advocating, because essentially the rights to parenthood focus not on financial capability, but focus on what we're going to bring to you today uniquely, is the idea whether parents actually take care of their children. We believe that their licensing system never looks at the relationship between parents and that of children. Why do children succeed even in poorer countries like that of India? Essentially because parents even got lots of children, they pay lots of attention to that of their children. Even though they're illiterate, it doesn't matter. Even if they're not having lots of income, it doesn't matter. Yes, I'll take the opening.
So are you suggesting 100 dying kids per family or one healthy child per family?
No, we believe that there can be lots of healthy children in one family, even their poor family. Over 100 is simply exaggerations. Because essentially, what is important of good parenthood is you care about the children. You care about the children's growth even if you're illiterate, in the sense that we see that Indian slums have already produced lots of good people, lots of technocrats going to good Indian universities, essentially not because their parents are rich, but essentially because their parents care about their children. They never tell us how their licensing system actually works in tackling what parents actually care about children. What is parenthood? Parenthood is about practice. You don't actually be good parents immediately. And therefore, before you have children, we believe that that's not accurate in reflecting what good parenthood is. You improve by actually having children. You know what children want in the long term. And therefore, it comes with practice, not with how much money you've got. On the other hand, we see that lots of good economic background parents actually got very poor children turning up. Why? Because parents don't care about their children. They are very rich, they provide lots of resources to children, but turns out that their children actually suck academically and suck in society, essentially because the parents did not do their duty. Their license system never solves all this problem, which is in the essence of improving their children. Furthermore, we look at children's role in the paradigm in those poor countries. Children often need to work because children are sometimes the earning income for the parents. They have to go to work. But if you have got large populations of children, which means that there will be some children that can particularly go and work, some children will be particularly staying at home and studying. But under their paradigm, it's only one-child policy. In order to sustain the family growth, we're pushing that only one child to actually go and work, which means that the child may not have the possibility of actually improving in terms of education, etc. We believe that this is actually harming the children's growth under their paradigm and under developing countries. Furthermore, we also believe that marriage is threatened. Marriage is threatened in the idea that children is always important in maintaining marriages. Because after 10 to 20 years, parents actually lose their sexual affections towards the opposite. But we believe that children plays a very important role in sustaining family, in providing each of the parents actually having that dream of that their children will grow, their children will improve, and that in the longer term. We believe that this is why marriages can be sustained in the longer term in those in these countries, and there's no exception to the paradigm under their model. We believe that if their model is being enacted, parents lose that particular incentive in doing in sustaining marriage, which is actually hampering marriages of parents in that of the long term. We are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you, the member of the opposition. May we now have the government whip to wrap up the government case? Thank you.
Yeah.
The entire opposition bench today come out and simply ignore the urgency of the problem today. That is both on the macro level, which our opening government has already pointed out, and on the closing government, we have tell you in a micro perspective, every family is suffering if we do not make a change to the status quo. First of all, a few rebuttals towards the opposition side. Firstly, they mentioned about the license effect and also the sex discrimination. We would not more likely to want to have a boy or male child. We will say is no. Firstly, the license is given before pregnancy, which you have no tendency or you cannot be sure of sex anyway. So we don't see the effect and don't see the correlation here. And secondly, the license is only ensuring the ability for you to have, and we are not saying that we are imposing a quota. These opposition side make it very clear. They, in the extension, they pointed out that parenthood is more important than money. Now we never equate or never compare the size of the importance of parenthood and also money here. Now, under our model, what we are trying to say is those people who still have the parenthood, who still have the willingness and determination to have a child, they are really if unaffected under the current model. what are we trying to exclude? It's those people who really want to have children, but even if they really want to have children, they cannot feed themselves, not to feed their children, not to mention provide some care, because they cannot even take care of themselves. We are trying to protect these potential children which may come in the future, and now we see the problem is that people are dying and being under pressurized. And thirdly, they are trying to accuse us of solving all the problems. We are not a perfect government. We are trying to say, we are trying to solve the most urgent problem, while might sacrifice some of the unimportant issues like rights, which I will elaborate is actually another protection. And right now, I'll conclude the debate into 3 clashes and tell you why is the closing government that solved the deadlock and win the debate today. The first clash is on rights and responsibility, the second clash is on effects on family, and the third clash is societal impact. On the first clash, what the opposition side primarily challenge us is the government have no right to make any judgment. Now we say that firstly, it's not to mention about this whether this is correct or not, it's never unconditional, because whenever we see that when government have to step in, we see it based on harm principle, now we must have to step in to do something to remedy the situation. No matter on the macro perspective or the micro perspective, which we see every individual is being affected, we see that the right to family life is not necessarily equal to the right to parent, because the right to parent comes from the right to family life. It's after you are born, you belong to a family, and then you can entitle to that family life. But the right to parent is different. You need some sort of responsibility, and we do not concur that this right is given unconditionally to everyone. Wow, on opposition side, what have we told you today? We have told you there are primarily 2 rights we are protecting under our paradigm, under our model today. That is the right to parent and also the right of children. As I've mentioned to you, that the right to parent, we should not allow it to come without any price, right? We believe that, as my partner has already clearly told you, that how important parenting is in family life and on a society level. We believe it deserves some kind of responsibility to ensure that how valuable this kind of right is. And we believe under our paradigm, we are not infringing such kind of right, but we are trying to endorse it, and this right will sublime to become a more important right, which your government is sending a message that this right is very important whenever you are granted. And secondly, we believe the right of children is not only the right to born, as what they have said. We believe the right to children is actually enjoying a protection state in a paternal state whenever they are being very vulnerable and they are not capable of protecting themselves, as our partner has already told everyone here, that under our model, we can ensure better ability, both financially and also whenever they apply for such kind of license. Such kind of license is a troublesome process which you have to deal with different kinds of issues. We believe this is already a determination and a demonstration that you are willingness to take this challenge. I'm not saying that it's an absolute certain that there will be no cases of domestic violence or whatever, but at least we set a hurdle, at least we ensure a minimal or reduction of similar events later. I'll tell you now.
But you still don't know whether the parent is good parent, because good parenthood is about taking care and caring about the children, not measures of their own needs.
Now, we are not trying to say under current status quo, those with good parenthood can, under our model, those with good parenthood, we are not trying to exclude those with good parenthood, but even if they are with good parenthood, they cannot take care of their children, no matter how good of their parenthood is, because they will die anyway. They cannot take care of their own life. How can we risk the future children's life towards their paradigm? We see, as a responsible government, we have to make this necessary sacrifice here. On effects of family, the opening opposition and talk about black market. We believe that this is not essentially the problem, because firstly, on the licensing system, we already increased the hurdles towards raising a child. And secondly, a license can always allow you to have traces. And we believe that this is exactly why we are trying to make a progress towards that black market situation in any countries. And on the closing opposition, they mentioned about threatening marriage. Now let's consider, if people only marry for children, well, how is it detrimental? Even if they have a children later, they might be not personally comfortable with each other. They will have family disputes themselves if inherently they marry for only children. Now exactly, the government is trying to step against these kind of people. We want them not only marry because they only want to have children, but they love each other, and this is the fundamental basis of marriage. Don't talk about this and don't mix it with having children. While on the opposition side, on the government side, we have told you the effect on family is clearly beneficial to 2 primary parties. Firstly, children are more secure and happy in the family because they know that their parents are guaranteed somehow of credentials and they are good enough to take care of them. While on parents themselves, we provide another opportunity to make them to exercise their rational calculus to make sure that they make careful choice before any judgment. On the third clash, the societal impact. The entire opposition bench care most about the feasibility issue where there will be still some wrong child being born. Now, we acknowledge the fact that it's never been possible to solve this, but under status quo, this problem still exists, and we have current measures to deal with that. And we think that this is wrong accusation towards our model, towards the wrong blame towards the government. But we think we are making a process because there's one more consideration now. Wow, on my partner, the closing government has told you very clearly that the government is doing two things. Firstly, we are protecting children, parents, and family. We are forcing them to make an informed decision. And secondly, we are sending an active message to civil society that we care not only about birth, but what after birth. And we also prevent actual discrimination, which is the most important point by my partner. We don't want to discriminate against any biological or adoptive parents. Now, on the closing government, we solve the deadlock between the reality problem and fundamental right and tell them our model can actually solve all the problems here. Their best case proposed here is many child in the status quo. While our worst case, it's no child or less child, but every child is being very happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Government Whip. May we now invite the Opposition Whip to close up the whole debate. Thank you.
Honorable Speaker, the message we got from side proposition is that in order to have children, in order to have a proper family, you need to be rich. In order to have children, you need to have a monetary threshold you need to cross, which you need to meet in order to have children. That is the social message our side proposition has given to this House today. And that is the social message we do not take for granted and we do not think it's just justified. So before moving on to the refutals, I'm going to tell you what are the major clashes today. The major clashes today is whether population is such a huge problem that needs to be controlled and whether population will be controlled in the first place. Secondly, whether the rights of parents are completely to be disregarded or the rights of parents are something we need to look at. Thirdly, whether children abuse and child abuse will continue to take place. And lastly, I'm going to talk to you about what is the role of the government and is the government fulfilling its role by doing what the side proposition is saying they're doing. So moving on to the few refutals we have got. Side proposition says they're not giving us any quota. They don't really want to think on the practical basis of this policy, despite the fact that this is a policy. The fact that it is a policy is that you need to make it clear to us in order to argue with you that what is your paradigm, what are the points you're giving. You're not telling us how many child we can have. You're saying it's not a one-child policy, it's not a two-child policy, it's not a three-child policy, but it's a policy. You're not telling us that how much monetary level you need to have, whether you're cutting off the poor people, you're cutting off the middle class people, the lower middle class, which group are you excluding and how much limitation are you going to put on them? The reason that we think that our proposition, opposition cannot argue properly is because you're not telling us clearly what you want to say, and this is a problem for us and it is harming our debate. So going on to the major clashes in this house. The major clashes is, should the population be controlled? Side proposition said their basic agenda is to control the population because developing nations have a population crisis, and this is essentially... Yes, sir.
And we defined countries that face population problem and which have a lot of welfare burden, not developing or undeveloped. How do you respond to that?
Countries which have a population problem are countries which are developing countries because those are the countries which have the poor people who are they're characterizing as the ones who need to have many children in order to have economic resources. I don't know how else can you characterize that debate. So going on to countries with developing problems, right? Countries with huge population. They talk about how it is hardly detrimental to them and how they have welfare spending a lot. We say that countries with population are the countries which are now the countries which are moving forward because we now see that they are the countries who can make the best use of their resources. Because at the current stage of development, governments are now trying to spread education to these labor force, which creates essential labor force to participate in this country. Thus, we say that population is not the detrimental effect on these countries which are hampering them. It is their inefficient government who cannot redistribute resources because they do not know how to do so, because they are not sufficiently allocating their resources. However, the people in that country are not the problem that is creating the population crisis.
They say that just by imposing a quota and without the government doing any active development in those countries, like giving them health service, like giving them education, you simply can change the way the people respond or the way population propagates. However, we say that even if population is a factor to control, by limiting this or by putting a quota on the number of births you have, you're creating more harms than good, and the harms being, my second clash, the right to parenthood and why it is so essential. We say that they have talked to us about how parents should understand that having a child is not a privilege. However, we say that having a child is very crucial for a parents to feel like parents, for a married couple to feel like a married couple. They say that marriage should be brought out of love, but we say having a child is an essential part of your marriage.
No.
We also say, no sir, we also say how parenting does not come from how much money you earn. There are parents from lower middle class groups who do not perhaps earn as much as you want to earn them, but essentially because of the fact that they're simply in the beginning of their life, they're simply in the beginning of their career, and they're going to be promoted eventually in their life to become much more resourceful and to become much more developed in their career. We say that monetary gains are something which develop over time and is not something which is endowed to you or given to you by because you get it by your heritage or inheritance. Yes, sir.
Please engage with our extension on the discrimination between adoptive parent and also biological parent.
Exactly. I am going to go to that about my point about child abuse, but before moving on, let me clarify this about parenting right. We also have tried to show to you a parenting right, the right to parenting should essentially be limited to the amount of emotional care are willing to give to your child. You simply cannot restrict it on financial burden, because financial burden is not any factor in determining how a family is structured or how a family is formed. You may have 5 child, and all of them may be doctors, engineers, etc. All of them leading to the development of that country, because you have put enough care to send them to public schools, which government has provided for them, because that does not require money, and you can essentially develop the labor force of that country without having to concentrate too much on how you're going to have child abuse, right? Lastly, my second clash is regarding the children's future and whether the child is rightfully protected. Number 1, they haven't told us that whether the government is going to give any economic support to these families, right? So all we know is that you're simply putting a quota on them so that they can have 1 child, which they apparently will take a lot of care of. However, we're trying to make it clear to you, because you're not essentially improving the financial conditions of these families, right? At the end of the day, they're still poor families, and these poor families still need money. If they're used to practicing child labor or sending their children to work, they will still do so even if they have 1 child, because they need to earn money, and that is not preventing them from sending their child to work or preventing child abuse. I do not see how putting a quota on the number of children you can have, or not letting you have any children at the first place, prevents poor people from abusing their children, etc. And then they talked about how we are trying to distinguish between adoption and married couples. Why people who adopt need to go through screening and married couples don't. Because people who adopt are not having their own children. The emotional bond they have is not as strong. That is the reason that people who adopt need to go through a screening process, because it's someone else's child you're going to take care of, that because it's someone else's child, the responsibility is on your hands to understand how, if you can take proper care of them. Because there is going to be a gap between them, and the child needs to understand whether he or she can accommodate into your family and is suitable for your family in order for the child to be willing to go there. That is the reason that these parents come and present themselves in front of the child they're going to adopt, so that they get to know whether the child is going to be accepting towards them. On the other hand, when you're having a child of your own, the child definitely accepts you because you're their child, and that is where it matters. Thus, we have shown to you how government's role is also very important, because government should not try to put quotas arbitrarily on people without giving them the sufficient welfare they should be giving, and how, even if you limit them, government would not suddenly become efficient because government is simply not willing to do so. Thank you, Honourable.